Hey, BDE fans, welcome back. Happy New Year. We're doing this one remote because, Mark, where are you, Mark?
I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, rainy and freezing.
Nice. Anyway, and I am fresh back from London and ready to rock. So, the big news, we did run a show this morning and we were sitting there going, there's literally nothing to freaking talk about in the energy business that happened. A couple of little stories. And lo and behold, Justin Trudeau threw a press conference and said, I'm out of here. So, Mark, what does that mean for the energy business?
Well, as I understand it, and reading some of the detail, is he resigns as leader of the party, but he remains as prime minister. The party is facing, I think, a mandatory election by October, and all signs point to his party getting crushed. So he will remain as prime minister, I guess, while all that sorts itself out. So I don't know from a practical standpoint how much changes, but I do think that, the drivers of his collapse in popularity and support are embedded in things like out of control cost. Housing shortages have been a real dilemma for Canadians. And I do think it portends well for, just have that coattail or draft effect that we've seen here in the US in some of the rollbacks of what have been fairly obstructionist political decisions, whether that translates into an acceleration or reacceleration of Canadian LNG, what that means for, the participation of Canadian equities, oil and gas stocks, in terms of investor favor. I do think that, that is the kind of the chief signal to energy markets. How quickly all that manifests, I don't know. And what happens in the meantime between, a threat of tariffs with Trump's inauguration imminent. Today is certification day, by the way, in Congress for the 2024 election. And obviously a notable day in history. 4 years ago, there are comparisons being made that, we're going to have a much more peaceful situation today than we did 4 years ago. And I think some of the mainstream media that I've read bits and pieces about the certification process today is that, somewhat ironically, it's going to be peaceful and pointing back to January 6th of 2021 as a comparison or a precedent. So, I don't know that in the near term much changes given the chaos in Canada, but I don't know. What's your take?
And I don't know Canada that well, but one of the things we were talking about this morning at the coffee shop, kind of with the old guys that I have coffee with each morning, they were asking about with Trump and this drill baby drill, what's going to happen there? We're going to see the market flooded with oil and oil prices drop. And, I kind of gave them our take that you and I have talked about. It's much more investor driven these days, that investors want to see, capital discipline. They want their dividends paid. They want, they're okay with flat production, maybe a little bit of growth, but not growth for growth's sake. And so I said that I don't feel like the regulatory environment is necessarily that big an impediment to drilling. But what it is an impediment to is what you were just talking about, these big infrastructure type projects, like LNG contracts, construction of those plants. And so, if anything, I would think we're going to see potentially some Canadian, U.S. projects coming together, pipelines and the like. I know that Keystone was a big deal to Trump, and I don't even know where that stands in terms of can it be revived or what's running, what's not running. But you would think that potentially, and I don't mean this to be derogatory to the Canadians, but you'd feel much more like Canada is part of the United States when it comes to energy infrastructure, particularly if the opposition party takes over in Canada. And so it's more that kind of point we've been making on BDE is, are we actually going to build all this infrastructure so we can have these data centers and have energy, not necessarily that we're going to pump a whole lot more oil out of the ground?
Yeah, and is there, some magic inflection here that all of a sudden the institutions that really drive the investment, at least on the public side, in oil and gas equities, is there going to be some aha moment as a result of this, Trudeau stepping down in a rightward shift? You would argue in the political profile of Canada, is that all of a sudden going to clear up the ambiguity around the political risk premium and make investment in Canadian energy and oil and gas, all that, is it a step change for institutional interest in equities? And all you have to do is look at how the traditional equities in the U.S. in the energy sector have kind of slogged along here. There's not been any great rotation outside of energy into U.S. energy equities. Is all of a sudden, maybe a lift of some of the political risk premium inherent in the Canadian energy sector. Is that going to create a big rotation catalyst? I don't think so.
I was going to say, all I remember is every time private equity went up to Canada and saw low valuations and all this opportunity, it feels like we all stubbed our toe. You get through the track record of every private equity oil and gas fund that went up there, and they just all stubbed their toes. So maybe everybody will forget and go back.
I think probably one of the more interesting structural plays to watch is, how do they position themselves, they being Canada, and particularly as it relates to natural gas, on the data center power demand growth build out. And as we talked about, I think a couple of shows ago, the inherent advantages that you have up near the Arctic in terms of how CPUs and GPUs and certainly compressors and turbines operate in colder climates. And, Canada has a tremendous endowment of natural gas. Will there be a renaissance related to data center power demand that we've been fixated on here in the U.S.?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It'll also it's also kind of another thing that we're seeing with Trump's not even president yet, but he seems to be impacting world events. And it'll be interesting watching just, how far does rhetoric go and kind of beating the drums for, all this stuff. Can he put Ukraine to bed? The war there? Can he get the hostages freed out of Gaza, etc.? Because it does feel kind of as unstable a world as I think we've seen in, call it the last, I don't know, since 9/11 maybe. And maybe that's just New Orleans and the terrorist there being from Houston, that's just kind of got me on edge. But it definitely feels like there's a lot going on in the world, and it'll be interesting to see, how the incoming administration handles that.
Well, and we do have to keep in mind really two things. One, this is definitely a one-term situation for the political revolution that the second Trump term brings. He's obviously limited to this term. And two, you've seen what's happened with last Friday's speaker election and the lead up to that, and the reality of the thin congressional majority in both houses that the Republicans have. And there were comments made by the Senate Majority Leader, the new Senate Majority Leader, John Thune of Montana, basically alluding to, I think, mainly the cabinet appointment confirmations, and that, this is going to be, it's a lot more complicated than kind of greasing the skids here, and we've got a full force mandate. I think there's going to be some quite a bit of political wrangling over a few of the nominees. So the inertia that you just look at it on the surface, well, we have control of both houses in the hands of the Republicans plus the executive administration. You've got a Supreme Court that's dominated by recent Trump appointees, and the notion that you've got kind of clear, unobstructed, straight line path to getting the agenda passed. Maybe I'm being a little cynical here. I just look at some of the signs that have come through. Although I was encouraged by the fact that they didn't mess around with the speaker vote and go through what they went through when McCarthy was displaced, which certainly would have motivated quite a bit of opposition, pushback, and attack, and I think created a lot of here we go again among the electorate. So, but the reality is we do have a pretty thin legislative majority with the party in power. So
yeah, at this point we had what, 3 or 4 defectors on the speaker vote, and Trump got on the phone with them, and lo and behold, they fell in line, and we got it done on, and I say the Republicans got it done on 2 votes. So definitely not the shit show that the McCarthy era was. And so be interesting watching them try to hold that in line. So one item that popped up that was pretty interesting, and you sent it over in the run of show this morning, is Biden basically taking federal lands out of play. And I've seen a lot of stuff on X going back and forth about, how can a president just do this? So tell us what's going on there.
Well, there was under the OCS Lands Act, basically put a perpetual ban or moratorium on new offshore leasing and development on, I think, 625 million acres, predominantly Atlantic and Pacific coast, some Bering Straits or Bering Sea, and then the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. It doesn't affect any of the, and I went and looked yesterday at, what is the active OCS lease count. Today that totals about a little over 12 million acres. And so we're talking about multiples, obviously, of what is theoretically or had been available for showing up in OCS lease sales by the Bureau of Energy Management. But if you look over the last couple of decades, there was a spurt of a push to get some things done in the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. You had Destin Dome, you had some other things that were going on in ultra deep water, and certainly offshore of the Canadian Atlantic coast longer ago than that. And my general assessment and thinking back on all that, there was a lot of rhetoric and hope and enthusiasm around those efforts from an exploratory development standpoint. I would say that, generously, that the history of success has been mediocre. And we've got plenty to do elsewhere, not the least of which is if we're talking about frontier or remote exploration, we've got plenty to do up and around the North Slope of Alaska. California has been pretty much a no-fly zone for decades. You did have some limited development offshore, but the magnitude of the ban, 625 million acres. I wouldn't ask ChatGPT what's the aerial extent of the lower 48. This is slightly less than 1/3 of the land area of the entire lower 48 region. It's a lot. Forget how many federal OCS lease blocks that would be. But from a kind of an exploration and a capital allocation priority, do these areas present, from a practical standpoint, all that much opportunity that is going to make the capital budget over the next 5, 10, 15 years for companies looking to explore federal offshore areas that are theoretically prospective. We've got a lot to do in existing Central Gulf of Mexico as it relates to more deep water, and particularly the high pressure, high temperature deep water that has been talked about recently. So it's a lot of acreage. How much does that limit the energy prosperity and energy security of the U.S. for the foreseeable future? Don't know. The other aspect of this is, Trump can come in on day one and immediately reverse that. My read of it is that he can't, without getting congressional approval. And as I spoke about earlier, with the thin majority, particularly in states that both Democrat and Republican that have coastal impacted areas or coastal affected areas, are you going to, see a strong kind of swell of support for rolling back something that, their home constituents, from a public perception standpoint, may largely be in favor of? And I think back in 2019, Trump had actually put a similar moratorium in place in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, particularly off the coast of Florida, that was in place, set to expire by, I think it was 2032 or 2033. This Biden ban has no expiration date, as I understand it. Purely, just in my view, purely a political kind of parting shot or signal in the larger context of the Biden administration's climate agenda. And even as I understand it, in the remarks on announcing the ban, referenced Macondo and basically said the payoff is not worth the risk, and using Macondo as the most recent example of what can happen when those black swan events occur. So,
yeah, the thing I didn't like about it is, this would have been a really good campaign issue for the United States to have thoughtful discussion about energy policy and what we should be doing. Because you're right, at the end of the day, it's probably not changing any great exploration area we need to be going after. It's nuisance type stuff. But we could have had that discussion. And again, it's like everything else, let's just hide it so we can get elected, and then we're going to go do the stuff we want. And I hope the electorate will remember this. So the next time, they come out and say, somebody comes out and says, hey, we're for this, you can really challenge them on, hey, did you vote yes or no when we tried to remove this offshore ban? So anyway, just kind of more of the same. And again, can we have a thoughtful discussion about energy policy? It's so important. Higher energy prices, lack of energy. Tell me about the trains in Colorado. I love this story.
Yeah, it caught my eye. I've been following trains a little bit. Former colleague and good friend Ryan Zorn, who is the director of energy additions, really policy focused, and has been really front and center to a lot of the energy and particularly power conversation in Colorado. But Doomberg put out a piece called Freight Hopping a few days ago, last week, I believe. And the latest idea is basically around a VC startup called SunTrain. And the concept is you, at least in the demonstration project, you load up a bunch of rail cars, 20 in this case for the demonstration, lithium iron phosphate batteries, which reduces the explosion and the flammability risk. But you're basically going to take advantage of these low power prices and charge these transmission trains out on the plains in Pueblo, where you have a lot of solar generation capacity. And then I believe the route that this demonstration train will follow, so you charge up literally the battery cars, which weigh a bunch, and then you deliver them, or you pull the train by diesel, by the way, to the Cherokee Power Station in Denver to take advantage of gap periods. And I saw one analysis that basically likened framed the market in which this concept, this battery by rail concept, is essentially participating in the segment of the market that natural gas peaker plants operate. And last year, the 999 peaker plants in the U.S. operated with a 6% capacity factor, which is a very, very tough market, especially if you're trying to time not only the charging of the batteries, but also delivering that power via rail to capture the arbitrage of, tight period and deficient supply periods to the metropolitan area in Denver. The other part, which was central to the Doomberg analysis and freight hopping, was a comparison of coal by rail, and essentially the energy density superiority of coal in a 100-ton hopper car is about 10x what the energy density delivered by this SunTrain concept. So the economics in both trying to participate in a peaker market and then delivering that power to take advantage of those arbitrage periods is hugely disadvantaged when you use just the inherent energy density and what power can be generated from a hopper car of coal versus a battery car. And so the other aspect of it is, once you discharge the batteries in Denver, you got to haul the quote unquote empty train, which weighs the same. The batteries discharging their electric stored power weigh the same going back to then be recharged at the solar facility out in Pueblo, which again is about, I think, a 110-mile trip. And so basically the math doesn't work very well. And one of the things that I attached along with this Colorado Sun article describing the SunTrain concept is, I mentioned Ryan Zorn earlier. He had done some months ago an analysis of the ski train that runs between Denver and Winter Park, and what the equivalent family of four costs, the carbon savings, and what the implied gasoline price that you would have to be willing to pay to really get to the point of indifference of taking a family of four on the ski train from Denver to Winter Park. But it just shows the difficulty of getting over these cost and economic hurdles. And essentially the SunTrain concept is, I don't know if you want to call it a stopgap, but it's something that, in lieu of building, I think it's called the Power Pathway, which is a multi-billion-dollar transmission project. You got to have more transmission capability and capacity to get this plains-based generation to where the demand is. And so in the meantime, let's run a bunch of diesel-powered expensive trains with batteries back and forth to test the concept. And I do know that the governor and the legislature have said, we're going to make this contingent upon getting some $10 million federal grant to get this 20 battery car demonstration project fired up and running. But you do have Pueblo has got, why Pueblo, there's a lot of solar generation capacity that's popped up. There's an old coal station that Xcel had, I believe, decommissioned, but you still have the power infrastructure. So you've got a big charging station in effect out there that is fed by solar power that's in the area that is somewhat remote from where the demand is, and this is just an alternative transmission concept.
I actually like everything. I think the thought process is great. I think one of the things we forget about in the energy business is that it's the incremental cost of everything that actually matters. It's the last barrel. It's the last MCF that prices stuff. And so it doesn't matter what the fixed cost is. If you've got a ton of solar out there already, if you've got railroad lines already built, okay, let's at least play around with, could this work? The thing I hated that you said is the 10 million federal grant, because I just hate government money distorting the economics of the energy business. But I do like the experimentation on it. I was my mind was going to, do you potentially, put solar panels out on the ocean and have ships going back and forth with batteries? I mean, the economics probably don't work on that, but at least thinking about it could be some cool stuff to do.
Yeah, stationary storage has a distinct advantage because you can cycle those multiple times in a 24-hour period or a multi-day period where, I haul my power load to Denver, discharge it. I've got to make the trip back and then recharge and then wait for, the appropriate market opportunity to run the train back to Denver and discharge. But I think a single car the discharge from a single battery car will power 20,000 homes for an hour or 1,000 homes for a day, something like that.
The other thing I hate when we think about this is probably only necessary because of the regulatory burden of being able to just build a power line from Pueblo to Denver. You would think you would think we ought to be able to build those transmission lines a lot easier, a lot quicker. And, at the end of the day, we've talked about it on BDE all year about how just a big a mess it is because of the blunt-nosed leopard lizard is here and we can't do this, and et cetera.
The analogy or the comparative case we talked about a few months ago was around this grain belt transmission line that was, I think, 3, 4, maybe 5 states involved. And you're basically taking renewable power under this Grain Belt Express transmission line from power generation, wind and solar in the Midwest, and delivering it to high demand centers or high use centers defined as Illinois and particularly Chicago. And Illinois ended up blocking. It was the piece that couldn't get its act together politically to get the last link of the transmission right of way approved. So you just don't build the line.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that being said, interesting thing to watch. So are we doing predictions for 2025?
Yeah, I'll let you kick that off.
Chicken. I actually think we're going to have, there was all I forget who said it, but one of the famous foreign policy things. I don't think it was Nixon, but one of the famous foreign policy people always said that it's always darkest before the dawn in the Middle East. That things are always feel really bad right before you have a major breakthrough of peace. And so I'm going to take this as things just feel really bad in the Middle East. So I'm going to say there's going to be some breakthroughs in the Middle East this year. We're going to pick up on the Abraham Accords. I'm going to say that the Saudis and Israel before the end of the year sign an accord for peace. So that's kind of my big take for 2025.
Mine is much more, at least micro, as it relates to the oil and gas sector. I think we're going to see quite a bit of strategic announcements, at least, and maybe it amounts to no more than investor relations slides. But I do think there's going to be a bit, if not a significant amount, of Me Too follow on to what Diamondback and Exxon have announced in finally getting on board and following the Chuck mantra of learning how to sell not gas molecules but electrons. I just, I think the coincidence or the alignment of the incoming administration, the fact that it seems like every week we're seeing, some data center headline, the most recent of which, and I think the highest profile of which, is what Meta is doing in Louisiana, which is just inherently going to be in concert with Entergy, but also going to be decidedly natural gas powered, with however the kind of creative offsets get them to renewables, et cetera. But I do think that those things are going to start to show up in the thinking and how oil and gas companies, certainly the more gas levered names, are positioning themselves.
No longer board discussions, actually action on the ground. So.
Yeah, at least, and maybe a smattering of announcements, a la Exxon, or a follow-on to Diamondback, where there's actually an agreement in place to start maybe breaking ground on some of these projects here in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Well, Happy New Year, Mark. Get yourself safely back to Houston, and we'll record in person next week. I think my video got a lot better when I switched Wi-Fi networks over here, so that may have been my bad.
I do have to ask, what did you think about the Titans trolling yesterday, wearing the powder blues, the Love You Blue, playing the Texans in Tennessee? Yeah, they were the Oilers.
Yeah, no, and I was always a Cowboys fan, so it didn't break my heart when the Oilers left like it did some other ones, but I definitely lived through it. And I still think it's really douchey that the NFL sends a letter to the University of Houston and says you can't wear the powder blue. I think they did the same thing to Rice when Rice wore the powder blue, and then to let the Titans do that. It's a little crappy, NFL.
Yeah.
Little tone deaf, I would think. So, but at the end of the day, it's the Texans are going to the playoffs and the Titans aren't. So take that.
Yeah, and we'll see how the offseason drama unfolds with your favorite team.
Oh, good God. I'm actually at the point where I might keep McCarthy. I think the guy's played.
I thought he got a vote of confidence.
It's weird. He did not. He has not been run out of town yet, and all. I think the players played hard for him. The thing I don't like about McCarthy is it feels like we're running an offense from 20 years ago that people have figured out. So I think we get out coached during games, but at the end of the day, the players seem to like him, and that's kind of half the battle. So I don't know. My buddy Fred and I were going back and forth that Jerry Jones is going through later stage Al Davis stuff, and we just don't like it.
Hey, I don't know if you guys recorded episode 9 recap or plans to do that?
No, we're gonna do 8 and 9 tomorrow morning.
I was on a flight last night that actually offered actual streaming.
Really?
Yeah, and
which airline?
I was trying like hell to get Paramount Plus to work, but I kept getting fatal errors, so I switched over to and watched some Netflix movie.
But nine was good.
I haven't seen 9
Jerry
yet.
Well, I won't ruin it for you, but you're going to want to watch it.
Yeah, I think you guys have been doing a great job on the recaps. That they're fun and entertaining to watch.
Yeah, they're fun, and I mean, like a guy came up to me at coffee today who's not in the energy business. He's a local fireman down in Richmond. He's like, "Hey, I was watching the recap with on Landman. My wife liked it." So anyway, that was fun.
By the way, one of the things from I believe it was the episode 8 recap that you guys did right before the holidays, the cartel scene showing up, and then the crew pulls numbers on them with all the weapons.
Right.
I actually thought Gates' story from South Texas and the ghillie suit and the laser blooms, the laser sight blooms showing up, that would have been a better actual scene.
Yeah, it might have been. That's right.
Than the script they followed in that episode. Yeah, that's some harrowing stuff in real life. Anyway, great job on that really stuff. Is. Look forward to more. And
January 15th, we're going to do a live take for the season finale. We're going to try to do it like you and I did BDE. So make
we
sure
already
that's
there.
On your calendar.
That'll be great.
Yeah, we are. All right, make it back safe.
Peace. We'll see you soon.